So much, Judy. And this is John O'Donnell coming to you from actually quite warm and sunny today, Pittsburgh. We finally have broken our cold snap and we're looking at temperatures in the 50s. So if you're here in Pittsburgh and out and about, you'd probably see people in shorts. I am the professor and chair of the Department of Nurse Anesthesia at the University of Pittsburgh, and my simulation role is as the Senior Associate Director and co-chair of our research committee at WISER, which stands for the Winter Institute for Simulation, Education, and Research. Tom?
And my name's Tom Dongelli. I'm the Director of Operations here at WISER. And John and I are both excited today to share some information about professional development and simulation.
So WISER has been around since 1994, and part of our mission within both the University of Pittsburgh and UPMC, which is our affiliated medical center, which helps to run and support WISER, is for us to do faculty development at numerous levels. And I should say professional development, because it is faculty within our schools of nursing and medicine and pharmacy and other health-related schools, as well as our schools of education. We also have our School of Engineering participating with us in WISER as one of our partners. We also do lots of development work for operational specialists. And so Tom will talk about the operational specialist work, and I'll focus my attention on work with some of my faculty colleagues. I see many of you around the room that I already know, so greetings and welcome to all of you. We've conceptualized this talk as kind of a sharing of our experience and a think piece about what exactly do we mean by professional development, and exactly what can we do as a center and as simulation educators to help our colleagues advance their careers. My simulation career started in 1993 and 1994, and I've been doing simulation work since then. And Tom has a similar story. Do you want to offer any additional comments, Tom?
No, and I think, where we started and where we came from, there's a lot of lessons learned along the way and a lot of tools that we've developed to allow us to do our job easier, and also things that we've learned that we would like to share with you today.
Thanks. So you have the benefit of already seeing our outline that's available on the site. But what we thought we would talk about are the many benefits, and I'm specifically going to talk about faculty development, but much of this has application also to operations and to individuals who work in that space. One piece that we believe is critically important, especially for faculty who need to demonstrate scholarship or who are being evaluated in the area of teaching effectiveness, is the role that simulation might play in their career advancement and how they might demonstrate that. We also know that many new instructors aren't very comfortable working in the simulation space. And I'll address a couple of the reasons why that might be later, but we know that if we help develop faculty, they're more competent, and it seems to translate into them being much more comfortable in actually delivering the teaching. We also, I think, have an obligation as an association to think about the development of the next generation of experts and thought leaders in the profession. Certainly professional development, if you're going to go through a simulation accreditation process, is a key element, and one that you have to be able to document and demonstrate. We also want our courses that we spend so much time and effort to make sure that they are of quality, to maintain their quality. One of the pieces that we do is we continue to revisit all of our courses on a regular basis to make sure that there has not been drift from the original course intention, and that the instructors are actually demonstrating the ability to effectively deliver the content. And the last 2 points: enhance student experience so that they are more ready through these quality improvement processes to actually be able to deliver better quality patient care through our use of our simulation educational work. This is a relatively old paper, but we have been thinking about this idea of more effective simulation for a long time. One of our partners is the Gordon Center for Research and Medical Education at the University of Miami, led by Dr. Barry Eisenberg. And Barry's name will come up a couple times in this talk because Weiser and the Gordon Center are partners in delivery of faculty development courses, specifically the ISIM courses, which that acronym means Improving Simulation Instruction Methodology. And so Barry wrote this paper about the same time that he, myself, Tom, Dr. Frampus, the director at Weiser, and Jeff Miller from Eastern Virginia Medical Center were developing that ISIM course process. And I point out here that these are the institutional factors that are necessary if you're going to have effective simulation. Certainly you need support of your institution and your colleagues and students. Certainly you need to integrate it within the curriculum so it makes sense and actually has a logical placement. But one of the key elements is this idea of trained faculty. And we've done work around the world. We've presented our courses in more than 20 countries. And this idea of trained faculty remains a persistent and I think will be a sustained problem, because what we all know is that faculty move around. Maybe you get a new job at a different health center if you're a clinical educator who does some work in simulation. Maybe you're an academic who's moving along the career trajectory, as many of us do. And one way to advance is to seek another position at another university and get a promotion through that process. And so we see this playing out as a issue, and there are some reasons for that. You know, my dad was a carpenter, so I spent much of my upbringing working with these kind of tools. But what we're talking about is different types of tools. And those are the tools that instructors need to be effective and efficient, I would argue, in their simulation educational work. And I think that this is a truism, but I think we need to make sure that we recognize this when we're talking about faculty development. We have great clinical educators who want to come and teach at our center. And we have great academic educators who also wish to come and teach at our center. But when they come, their level of comfort is not great because the environment is not the same as what they do clinically, which is always around an understanding of that there's a patient there and that takes precedence. And what we do is not exactly what you do in a classroom, because it's not efficient for us to be doing lecture-like activities within a simulation center unless it's something that you absolutely have to do. So we need to think about how we help faculty understand what are the tools and how they can gain them. Certainly there are lots and lots of skills that simulation faculty members need to be able to present. Face-to-face presentation is obviously a key skill, and that could be anything from a lecture style to a active facilitation. We now all have to have virtual skills. That's simply something that's a reality during this pandemic. And I don't know how many times I've heard, you're muted at meetings, even now, as people still struggle to become more facile in use of virtual skills. We know that developing and presenting case studies is very analogous to this idea of scenarios that we spend so much time in developing. And then certainly we have many things that we call simulation. Perhaps it's workshops, or maybe we're thinking about workshops that are directly connected to clinical instruction so we can show transference. And then the general bucket of what we consider to be simulation, which in my mind is very, very broad and ranges from everything from workshops and task training all the way up through complicated team training exercises and in situ simulations. And so one problem in faculty development is in this space is that there's not one skill, but there are many, many skills, and they are nested not just in one place, but nested in many places. And so it requires a broad spectrum of skill development if you truly want to gain competence all the way up through expertise. At our center, and Tom, would you share just for a second kind of the scope of how many courses, how many instructors, et cetera? Even during the pandemic year, I think it's pretty impressive for people to understand kind of the scope of what we're trying to do at Weiser.
Sure. So approximately right now we have about 420 instructors that utilize Weiser. These are all instructors that come from their either clinical areas or their educational areas, utilize the facility, and then return to those facilities after they're done teaching here. we don't house instructors here at Weiser. That's not our model. Last year, we did about 1,600 classes here at Weiser, approximately. And we currently have about 160 courses that we offer.
Yeah, and Tom, as far as all of those instructors, how many would you estimate are actual simulation experts, and how many are competent in their work because we've developed a curricular structure around them to support them?
Yeah, and I think that's important. Not many are simulation experts. People that want to put the extra time in will actually become experts in that area, but not many have the time to put the extra time in to do that. So we need to teach them how to be able to teach their courses. And I think that's an important model that we have here at Weiser, which isn't making someone an expert in all areas of simulation. It's helping them be able to utilize simulation to teach the course that they want to teach, not all courses.
Yeah, and so, you know, I have this graphic, and I've put a little bit of animation into the graphic, as you can see, with this idea that there's a continuum. But what I want to make sure that I'm clear about is these boxes seem like they're getting bigger and bigger as you gain skill. So what I'm trying to represent here is the knowledge level of the individual. I would tell you that the numbers, if we would quantify this and put on the left-hand axis here the number of people, the big box would be at the beginning, and then it would be smaller and smaller numbers. And so I think that this is something that we should think about, because even with people who are quite familiar with simulation, they often don't have the time to dedicate a big chunk of their career to truly develop the number of encounters and the number of hours needed to become a true expert. And so I'll discuss that as I move on here for a bit. And so my answer to this question, which is rhetorical, of course, do all the faculty need to become simulation experts? My answer to that is no. And in fact, I'm not even sure it's possible for us to make that happen, especially with the scale that we're talking about at our place. But I think that we can help people move toward expertise. And I would just remind on a couple fronts, you know, probably the most famous researcher in the area of expertise is K. Anders Ericsson, who talks about this idea of deliberate practice and how much time and effort is required. And notice that in his work, especially looking at high-level experts in the area of things like high-level musicians and mathematicians and so forth, it takes a really long time to develop expertise. And yet we have a need for our clinical faculty, especially, to be able to come to our centers and actually participate and perform as subject matter experts in our courses. And so how to solve the problem. Many of us are familiar with this Ericsson work. You're probably also familiar with the work of Malcolm Gladwell, who popularized this in his book Outliers, The Story of Success, and the anecdotal stories of expertise development. And he talks about this idea of 10,000 hours, which corresponds roughly to that 10-year period of time. And again, you know, I don't know what everyone's thoughts are on this. Hopefully we'll get some feedback from the group. But, you know, the idea that people are going to spend 10,000 hours of dedicated time when they have such precious time anyway is to me, not necessarily practical. When I think about pathways of skill development in simulation, and when we think about how we try to have people become familiar with simulation in our center, usually we start with things like observational exposures, and we try to have them reflect on what did you experience as a simulation recipient, as a participant, as you were going through your training. Now, with people of my age, and I'm in my late 50s, there wasn't a lot of simulation in our training unless you would count ACLS, PALS, BLS types of training as part of your underlying education. And so when we did our initial simulation work, and Tom and I started almost at the same time at Weiser in the early 1990s doing this work, there was no one to go observe. We were essentially creating the field with other experts around the country. Now there are many, many formal training programs that you can engage in. And so we offer programs. There are many other programs around the country. There are programs available through NON, through the Society for Simulation, of course, which this annual meeting is part of. And then there's no replacement for actual experience in working in simulation. It's like anything else. There needs to be experience, and I would argue deliberately attempting to get better, utilizing quality improvement processes. And in my mind, those kind of things should be structured. And I would argue that we should be thinking about a way to stratify what is important for new people, what is important for intermediate people, and what would be something that true experts should be working on. And then finally, we should have some sort of idea around mentoring. We have a simulation fellowship advisor. We've trained more than 40 participants since we started our fellowship program. And one key element, especially with those individuals who are not native to the United States, is they require mentoring. And I don't mean mentoring just within the fellowship. I have continued my mentoring efforts into the point in time when they go back to their countries or back to their institutions and do that work. Because I find that they continue to need support, and it's something that we've committed to as a center. Tom, do you want to talk or comment on that at all? Because you're certainly a big part of our mentoring program, especially for the operations group, because we also have an operations course where we mentor them.
Yeah, and I think the important part is, you know, whatever these fellows are doing, it's just for a snapshot of time. So when they return, they actually put into practice whatever it is they learn here. And if you go along the theory of we never stop learning, they are learning from their experiences, and they'll still have questions even after they leave here. And we feel that just coming here and taking a course or a fellowship or whatever you're here for, on the simulation education side, it's just not enough to be able to have you do this and then go home and not have any interactions. We feel like there needs to be follow-up, there needs to be mentorship long after you attend a class somewhere.
Thanks. And so how to jumpstart the trajectory? Well, there's some resources, that I think are very important. First off, just telling someone who's interested in simulation that there are more than 20,000 simulation papers that have been published since this movement began is really not very helpful. It's the papers are published all across the industry. There's no limit to the number of journals that will publish a simulation article if they have some sort of educational component within the journal. And so how do we focus people? And notice that on the top left here are articles of influence. And the Simulation Research Committee of IMSH has for the last 3 years been curating Advances in Simulation, British Medical Journal Simulation, Clinical Simulation in Nursing, and Simulation in Healthcare journals to identify the most influential papers. So as we all know, with academia, especially, you want to be citing things that are recent. And so this is a very useful tool so that your individuals that you're trying to develop can look at what experts across the simulation research spectrum think are the papers you should be reading over the last 3 years. Additionally, it's my opinion that classic papers and ones that are cited most frequently are critical. In this work by Walsh et al. in Simulation in Healthcare, they analyzed the 100 most cited articles on healthcare simulation. Now, this was done in 2018, but the numbers have only continued to accumulate for these authors. And notice that the most influential paper was written in 2005, about the time that Barry Eisenberg was doing that work with us in developing our faculty development course and writing that earlier chapter that I referenced. And you can see that this seminal paper that he wrote, the Systematic Review of Best Practices in the Best Evidence in Medical Education Systematic Review, is the most cited paper in simulation. And you can see the other articles that are on the top 10. I think that if you're going to guide people to read papers that are classic, that this might be a good list to start with. There's also been significant interest in the idea of implementing faculty development programs that actually work. And so despite the early nature of the development of what we are now calling implementation science research, there's still not an exact structure or understanding of what works best in developing faculty. Mary Fay, Mark Arbach, and Damien Stild editorialized this in last February when they commented on the work by Adam Cheng et al. As they've been developing their faculty development programs utilizing the Dreyfus and Dreyfus model of skill acquisition. That's a famous model, which has also served as the backdrop for the Jeffries model for simulation faculty development. A second really good paper to think about is this work by Peterson et al. That includes Chad Epps' work at the University of Alabama, Birmingham. And they looked at faculty development in a very structured, formalized model. And so if you want to think about a model to adopt that is quite structured and quite formalized, I think this paper is well worth reading to give you some really good ideas. And this is also quite a recent paper from August of 2017. And then we have adopted a model that we've called, since about the mid-1990s, the expert curriculum competent facilitator model. That's what we use at Weiser to address those issues of scale that Tom talked about earlier. In this model, and we describe it in this paper that we published in 2019, we have a curriculum development director at Weiser. And we have a whole process where if you decide you want to have a course, then if it's got a research element, it comes to our research committee for an evaluation of resources needed. If it's just going to be an academic course that's part of your regular curriculum or one that you want to add to your healthcare curriculum, then you come to Weiser leadership. That's represented by Dr. Frampus, who oversees everything, and myself and Tom, and we have a leadership team that analyzes courses. And so what our plan is that whoever the subject matter expert is who wants to do the development on the faculty side, they work with us to develop a curriculum that is infused with best practices and expertise. And then because that individual usually doesn't have enough time to get out of whatever their clinical obligations are to teach this every single time, we develop a companion course for instructors that is parallel to the participant course. And both of those are then placed on our learning management system with the instructors able to access everything and with the participants only able to see the participant materials. And the instructor side is quite prescriptive, structured, and formalized so that anyone with just brief orientation who reviews that instructor material can come and effectively teach the course with good standardization of the course elements. Tom, maybe I'm forgetting something, but is that a fair representation of our overall process?
Yeah, and the competent, facilitator expert curriculum model is one that we've adopted and utilized for a long time. And I think it's allowed us to have expert curriculum and then not need to train facilitators to an expert level.
Right. And then, of course, the next element is we do have to go back and do QI, working with the original course author to make sure that the course is not drifting, as I noted before, because that is something that happens as new individuals come into the course. They tend to want to teach things that they're passionate about. And there's nothing wrong with that. It's just that if it deviates too far from the original course objectives, we need to bring it back into line. And so I would argue, and we argue at Weiser, that there are some skills that you really need if you're coming to be a competent facilitator. And that would be skills in facilitation and debriefing. So the biggest number of faculty development courses that we run internally are focused on those two skill sets. How do you facilitate a session and make it run? And how do you debrief a session so that you can summarize and make sure that people leave with an understanding of what were the most important points within the course? What were you supposed to learn today? At a higher level, if you decide that you want to be the person who's the subject matter expert making the course, we think you need to understand things about design, working within our templates and models, so that you can develop scenarios and if you put several of those together, what we would call an overall course. And then at more sophisticated levels, especially for people who need to show this academically, that they're doing scholarship, then we're talking about assessment elements and research elements. And then finally, at the upper tier, we see program evaluation types of activities and curricular integration activities at the higher level to be higher level skills. Now, it might be that some of these are necessary for people at lower levels and so forth, but this is in general the trajectory that we think is important in stimulating that faculty development process. I'll finish my little section here by just noting that we have this course. Now, what's in a name? That's an interesting question. So back in 2006, Tom, when we were developing this, I believe the name of the course was the Healthcare Simulation Instructor Development Program, HSIDP. Do you recall that?
I do, yeah.
Yeah, and so nobody came. Maybe it was the name wasn't right. I don't know. But one of my colleagues who's just outstanding at this said, well, you know what? Why don't we just call it ISIM? And that catalyzed tremendous interest, whether that was because of the iPhone or just everyone's understanding of this I being in front of words. But this has led this development of this course, which we first launched in 2007. Has been run literally hundreds of times. And we have had thousands of participants who have come through the course with very great experience, and many of those participants going on to publication, presentations, scholarship, running simulation centers, building simulation centers around the world. And we now have a whole suite of these courses, and we focus and drill down on specific things like ISIM for research, ISIM for assessment, ISIM for facilitation and debriefing, et cetera. And so it's just an example of how you might develop a whole course trajectory based on a foundational idea. Oops. Tom, I'm going to stop sharing and turn this over to you.
Give me 1 second here, John. Can you see this? How's that? Can you see that? You're muted. All right, so if we can see this, then I got the thumbs up from you. I'll take it. So now I want to talk specifically. John gave you a lot of good ideas around, some pathways for improving yourself and improving your faculty at your simulation center. And even to a certain extent, he talked a little bit about your operational staff as well. But, I want to specifically talk for a few minutes about the certifications that are offered through the society. And if you think about whether you are a CHSE, a CHSOS, which John and I share some of those certifications, there's some pretty good rationale behind why someone would want to be one of those. And if you look at what the society says, one of the first things they say is you receive a formal professional recognition of your specialized knowledge and skills. The other thing is that you are pretty much confirming your commitment to the profession and to the development as a lifelong learner. The other thing that they talk about is the international recognition. And then, you're going to display to people your specialized knowledge. So to employers or to people using your facility, you now have this specialized knowledge. I personally feel that it also does something that maybe not necessarily touched on so much, but it creates a standard of best practices within the roles. So each role then, if you're going somewhere and you're meeting someone that is CHSE or CHSOS, you have expectations now because they've met certain standards. And John, I don't know if you want to add to that at all, anything.
Well, I would just add that there are also advanced versions of these credentials, which include not only attainment of the necessary knowledge and skill, but also a professional portfolio of accomplishment. So I think you're going to touch on that, but I think that's an important thing to consider as well.
Right. So the next thing then is to really look at the different types of, certifications that you can get, whether you're CHSE, which is a certified healthcare simulation educator, and then or CHSOS, which is a certified healthcare simulation operations specialist. And each of those roles also have an advanced certification as well. I want to just talk to you for a few minutes about the CHSOS. So if you are going after your CHSOS, the first thing they want you to be able to do is to participate in healthcare simulation in an operations specialist role. So if you want to know more about what that role, what they're looking for, there's some links later in the presentation that can talk about that. You also have to demonstrate your expertise with learners, interacting with learners, whether those learners are from the academic side, like students, or whether they are from the healthcare side, which is practicing professionals. From an education side, they want you to have a bachelor's degree or a combination of education and experience. And then this is pretty key as well, and I completely agree with this, that you need to have at least 2 years experience in that operations role. Without 2 years experience, there's not enough knowledge built up, there's not enough experiences built up, like any residency or any other type of education, where you would need that experience to be able to sit down and study and actually pass a standard test like they offer. And if we're looking at the CHSOS-A, really the big difference here is you need to be currently certified as a CHSOS, very similar with the education and in your role, but now you also have to have a documented 5 years experience as a CHSOS person in an operations role. And the last thing, which I think is really important, which is the ability to demonstrate a focus on simulation and your expertise. So you need to be able to show your expertise in simulation. And this was an important part. I applied for this and I'm waiting to hear back. But as part of that, I had to show some scholarly project that I did that showed my expertise. So if you want additional information about any of that, there's a link here. Like Judy said, this presentation will be available to you. You can follow that link and be able to see that. One of the other things that I want to challenge people on is not just shooting for your CHSOS or your CHSE and being done. That's a part of it. At Wiser, we try to create educational pathways for each of our roles within the facility. And one of the things that we encourage is for people to maintain their, maybe maintain their existing role in healthcare in addition to whatever role it is that they are hired here for at the facility. And even if they're not hired here at the facility, what can their existing role do? Their existing role be to actually enhance their time here at Wiser. So as an example, if someone goes and obtains their EMT or their paramedic license, that would be a great way for them to learn medical terminology and physiology and pathophysiology, and this would allow them to be able to do their job as a CHSOS or a CHSE much better than it would be if they were just taking the CHSOS or the CHSE by themselves. John, I don't know if you have any additional comments about that. Okay. So a lot of people ask us, where do we get started? And just talking from the CHSOS side, one of the things that I tell them to do is look at your current job function. Look at what you're currently doing. Look at what your facility's asking of you in your role. At Wiser, you have to, as a CHSOS, you still have to get your BLS and your ACLS certifications. In addition to that, you need to become a BLS and an ACLS instructor. And then we encourage people to actually go beyond that then and be active in the Society for Simulation in Healthcare, be active in participating in teaching classes here at Wiser, and I'll share some of that information with you in a minute. But continue your education by attending IMSH. This year it's all virtual, so there should be no reason why a lot of people aren't attending IMSH. The other thing that we encourage our people to do is attend local vendor workshops, or we will host vendor workshops and invite our faculty and invite our staff in to actually see it. On the CHSOS side, and even on the CHSE side, SimGhost is also a good opportunity for people to attend and also learn about things that they wouldn't normally know for their job functions. Do you have something, John?
Nope.
Okay.
You know, one of the things I do have something to say. One of the things I think also to think about is not just get the certifications, but to just understand that process. You know, the BLS, ACLS, PALS instructor process is fairly intense. And so, you know, just to understand how AHA has approached it, I think is instructive.
Well, and I think that's important also because then that gives them a perspective of what an instructor is looking for and what instructors would normally need in these situations. And we hope that that carries on into their job functionality. The other thing that we encourage people to do, like I said, look at their professional role and then visit other centers that either do very similar to what they do or do completely different from what they do. And if they do, look at the role of the simulation specialist at that center, see what they're doing. How do they manage their center calendar, their equipment, their class support? These are all things that you could take back and actually utilize to increase your job functionality. And then something that not a lot of people focus on, but is the professional development plan. So I really feel whether you are talking about instructors at your center or you're talking about your simulation center staff, people should have professional development plans. In addition to whatever their role may be outside of the center, you need to have professional development plans for people that utilize your center. And what I mean by that is you know, if you're going to go after accreditation, one of the things you'll need to think about is how you train your instructors, how you maintain training of your instructors, and what things do you offer your instructors? No different than the simulation specialist. So how do we train them? How do we offer continuing education to them? And then one of the things that you may want to think about also is, you know, we are very willing to share what works and what doesn't work here at Wiser, where we have failed. And it's very humbling, but you may want to ask centers what works and what doesn't work for you. And if travel's an issue, is there anything they can do for you virtually? And, you know, John was talking about our simulation specialist training program. And at Wiser, we've developed a program called TechSim. TechSim, actually, we mapped the CHSOS blueprints and we created a simulation specialist training program. It's called the Healthcare Simulation Operations Specialist Training Program. And that program there's an online program, but there's also an on-site program for people that want to come to actual Wiser and experience the things that they wouldn't learn online normally. And then we also have programs for simulation center management. So from a resource perspective, you know, when you think about the society and you think about how they can help you actually promote your career, there's a lot of resources, whether it's professional development or the toolkits that they have in the resource section, or even from a credentialing. And my thing about credentialing is, even if you're not going to apply to become a simulation center that's credentialed by the society, you should probably take a look at their process and look at your best practices and see how you compare. John, I don't know if you have anything else. You're muted. You're muted.
I wanted to say we have the SimTech courses online now, but also we have begun the development process of moving all of our iSim courses to virtual platforms as well. And so thinking about not only how you develop faculty, but how you develop the support structures for faculty and for that kind of virtual delivery needs to be a very careful process if you want to maintain effectiveness while being able to do things within the environment of not being able to necessarily meet face to face as we might want to. So, you know, we're fortunate to have a internal learning management and course management system, but it's something to think about. I've worked in Blackboard platforms and Canvas platforms and Moodle platforms. They all have their strengths, but you know, there is this need for faculty to also understand how to use whatever that learning management system is. And that's kind of a different skill set, I think.
And John, someone actually commented on a sign of expertise is noticing what doesn't happen.
Yeah.
I didn't know if you wanted to elaborate on that at all.
Well, that was a comment from Gladwell. And, you know, just to go back and just think about expertise development. So people who are experts no longer are step by step oriented. They have developed processes mentally and in their skill sets so that when you watch them, you can't really tell exactly where one skill stops and where the next one starts. It's a smooth flow and process. And typically what experts do, either intentionally or as part of that development, is they exclude everything that's extraneous to the actual accomplishment of whatever it is that they're trying to do. And so being able to eliminate those things which aren't important is a true expert level skill set. But it's hard to quantify and very difficult to study. But a great quote by Gladwell.
Yeah, and I think, you know, we live that a little bit here from the standpoint of we are trying to teach people how to teach their courses and not teach them everything. So part of our role is actually knocking all the noise out that would normally distract a new person in this industry or a new instructor here, and just having them focus on the things that are important for their curriculum.
Well, and Tom, here's the other thing. Often the people who come to us are clinical experts.
Right.
And, you know, if we could just use an anesthesia procedure, let's just say intubation. Well, someone who's expert at that no longer thinks about every single step. For example, you know, is your patient awake or not? Okay, let's open their mouth now. Okay, let's put the blade in the right angle in the right place. Let's slide it down. Let's move it to the left, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. There are many steps to that. And so working with experts, they just do it automatically and smoothly. So deconstruction of those kind of things is another thing that we work with experts on. You know, okay, what if it's a novice? Is there some sort of best practice for this? Can we get some sort of step-by-step checklist? And I think it's the same in whether it's faculty development or whether it's student development. You need to think about, as you develop people, this is a new skill set. And so they are now going to be step by step until they develop some expertise. Then it becomes smoother. And then as they gain more skill, then it starts to look more like expert behavior. So we should use our understanding of this literature to inform our mentoring and teaching processes, just like we would do if we had a group of participants in a simulation course. I think there's a very good analogy between the two approaches.
I agree. Good. Judy, do you have anything else for us?
No, thank you very much. I did post the link in there that should be up. We usually upload them after this afternoon, so we should have it up to no later than Friday morning. And good presentation. I wish you well for the rest of the day. And just remind the attendees to visit you in the virtual hall.
Thank you, everybody, for taking the time.
Thanks. Great to see everyone.